The gunshot echoed across the valley as Nora Flynn dropped to her knees before the freshly dug grave, her trembling fingers clawing at the loose dirt that now separated her from the man she had loved for 7 years. It was 1878 in the unforgiving territory of Colorado, and at 26, Nora had become what she had feared most since following her husband westward, a widow in a land that offered little mercy to women on their own. "Thomas," she whispered, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "What am I supposed to do now?" The hot summer wind whipped her auburn hair free from its pins, the same wind that had carried away her husband's final breath just 3 days prior when outlaws raided their small homestead on the outskirts of Silverdale. She hadn't heard the approaching hoofbeats, nor noticed the tall figure dismounting nearby. It wasn't until a shadow fell across the grave that Nora realized someone stood behind her. "Madam," a deep voice said softly. Startled, Nora turned to face a man she'd never seen before. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were trail-worn, a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and a Stetson held respectfully in his hands. "I don't mean to intrude on your grief," he continued, his voice gentle despite its roughness. "I only arrived in town yesterday. Name's Vaughn Aldridge." Nora quickly wiped her tears with her sleeve, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Aldridge." The cowboy took a step closer, his gaze moving from her to the simple wooden cross marking her husband's grave. "It ain't pity I'm offering, madam." He paused, then spoke words that would echo in Nora's mind for weeks to come. "You're not alone." Nora's breath caught in her throat. How dare this stranger presume to understand her situation? She stood, brushing dirt from her black mourning dress. "You know nothing about me or what I've lost, sir." "No," he admitted, "but I've seen that look before, in my own reflection." He gestured toward the grave. "Your husband." How'd it happen? The directness of his question caught her off guard. In town, people spoke in hushed tones around her, offering platitudes but never addressing the violence that had stolen Thomas from her. "Raiders," she said, the word bitter on her tongue. "They came for our horses." Thomas tried to stop them. Vaughn nodded solemnly. "The Keller gang's been hitting farms all through this territory, sheriffs offering a bounty." "A bounty won't bring Thomas back," Nora replied sharply. "No, madam, it won't." He placed his hat back on his head. "But justice might help you sleep at night." Before Nora could respond, the church bell from town began to toll, signaling noon. The sound seemed to break whatever strange moment had passed between them. "I should return home," she said, suddenly aware of how improper it was to be speaking with a strange man at her husband's grave. "May I escort you, Mrs. Flynn, Nora Flynn, and no, thank you, I know my way." She gathered her shawl around her shoulders. Though the summer heat hardly warranted it, Vaughn stepped back, giving her space. "Then I'll bid you good day, Mrs. Flynn." He turned to leave but stopped after a few paces. "If you need anything at all, I'm staying at the Coleman boarding house in town." Nora watched him mount his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that seemed nearly as wild as the land itself. "Why would you help a stranger, Mr. Aldridge?" she called after him. He looked back, the sun casting his face in half-shadow beneath his hat brim. "Because 7 years ago, I buried my wife and child, and I know what it means to feel like the world's ended." With that, he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Nora standing alone at the grave once more. That night, the small cabin that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed to close in around Nora. Everywhere she looked, she saw Thomas, his spare boots by the door, his jacket hanging on a peg, the chair where he'd sit in the evenings and read by lamplight. She tried to sleep, but the bed felt enormous without him beside her. Just before dawn, she finally drifted off, only to be awakened by the sound of horses approaching. Fear gripped her as she remembered the raiders. Were they returning to take what little she had left? Grabbing Thomas's shotgun from beneath the bed, Nora crept to the window. In the gray morning light, she could make out 3 riders approaching her homestead. As they drew closer, she recognized Sheriff Mills in the lead, followed by his deputy and, surprisingly, the cowboy from the cemetery, Vaughn Aldridge. Nora quickly pulled on a dress over her nightgown and stepped onto the porch, the shotgun still in her hands. Mrs. Flynn, Sheriff Mills called, removing his hat. Sorry to disturb you so early. What's happened? She asked, her eyes darting to Vaughn, who remained on his horse a few paces behind. Mr. Aldridge here has offered to help track the men who killed your husband, the sheriff explained. Says he's got experience with these types of outlaws. Nora's gaze locked with Vaughn's. And why would you do that, Mr. Aldridge? Like I said, Mrs. Flynn, justice helps with the sleeping. There was something in his eyes, a determination, perhaps, or a pain that mirrored her own. Sheriff Mills cleared his throat. We were hoping you could tell us more about the men who attacked your homestead. Any details you remember might help. Nora hesitated, the memories of that terrible day threatening to overwhelm her. There were 4 of them, she finally said. Thomas was in the field. I was inside when I heard the shouting. Her voice wavered. By the time I got outside with the gun, they'd already shot him. They took our horses, 3 good quarter horses that Thomas had been training. Did you see their faces? Vaughn asked, dismounting and approaching the porch. Nora nodded slowly. One had a scar across his cheek, right here. She traced a line from her temple to her jaw. Another wore a red bandana. They didn't even try to hide their faces. That's Keller and his brother for sure, Deputy Williams said. They've been getting bolder. We're forming a posse, Sheriff Mills explained. Heading out today to track them down. I want to come, Nora said suddenly, surprising even herself. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mrs. Flynn, the sheriff began, this is no job for a woman, she finished, anger flaring. They killed my husband in front of me, Sheriff. I have every right to see justice done. It's dangerous, Vaughn interjected. We could be gone for weeks, tracking through rough country. This is my fight too, Nora insisted, gripping the shotgun tighter. And I know how to use this. Thomas made sure of that. Sheriff Mills shook his head. I'm sorry, Mrs. Flynn, but I can't allow it. It wouldn't be proper, and it certainly wouldn't be safe. Nora felt frustration building inside her. Since Thomas's death, everyone had been telling her what she could and couldn't do, where she should live, whether she should sell the homestead, if she should return east to her family. She was tired of others deciding her fate. Then I'll go on my own, she declared. They took everything from me. I have nothing left to lose. You have your life, Vaughn said quietly. Don't be so quick to throw it away. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a recognition of shared grief. Before Nora could respond, Vaughn turned to the sheriff. I'll stay behind, he announced. Keep an eye on Mrs. Flynn's property while you're tracking the gang. Make sure they don't double back. The sheriff looked surprised. That wasn't the arrangement, Aldridge. We need your tracking skills. Williams is a capable tracker, Vaughn replied. And something tells me Mrs. Flynn might need protection more than you need another gun. Nora bristled. I don't need a keeper, Mr. Aldridge. Not a keeper, he corrected. An ally. He looked back at the sheriff. What do you say, Mills? Fair compromise. After a moment's consideration, the sheriff nodded reluctantly. Fine. We'll head out, follow the trail while it's still fresh. Aldridge, you stay and keep the widow safe. He tipped his hat to Nora. We'll bring them to justice, Mrs. Flynn. I promise you that. As the sheriff and deputy rode away, Nora found herself alone with the mysterious cowboy who seemed determined to insert himself into her life. I didn't ask for your help, she said, lowering the shotgun but not setting it aside. No, he agreed, but you're getting it all the same. He gestured to the fields beyond the cabin. That wheat needs harvesting soon, or you'll lose the crop. Your husband would have had help lined up. The practical question caught Nora off guard. The Taylors from the next homestead over were supposed to help, but she trailed off. With Thomas gone, she doubted they'd honor the arrangement. Then we'd best get started, Vaughn said simply, removing his jacket. I'm not much of a farmer, but I've cut my share of wheat. Mr. Aldridge, Nora began, bewildered by his presumption. Vaughn, he corrected. If I'm going to be working your fields, you might as well use my given name. For the first time since Thomas died, Nora felt something other than grief, confusion, yes, but also a strange sense of relief. This man owed her nothing, yet here he was, offering to help with the back-breaking work that had been keeping her awake at night. Why are you really doing this? She asked, her voice softer now. Vaughn's expression grew distant. When my wife died, I had no one, drove me to some dark places. He looked back at her, his gray eyes intense. No one should face that kind of loss alone. There was more to his story, Nora was certain, but she didn't press. Instead, she set the shotgun against the porch railing. "The scythes are in the barn," she said. "I'll make some coffee." For the next several days, they fell into an unexpected routine. Vaughn worked the fields from sunrise until the heat became unbearable around midday. Then he'd repair fences, tend to the remaining livestock, or fix the loose boards on the barn. Nora cooked and brought water to the fields, but also worked alongside him, refusing to be relegated to domestic tasks alone. They spoke little at first, the weight of their respective losses creating a comfortable silence between them. But gradually, over meals and during breaks in the shade, they began to share pieces of themselves. "You're not from around here," Nora observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. "Texas originally," Vaughn replied, sipping the coffee she'd made. "Moved around a lot since then." "After your wife?" she asked cautiously. He nodded. "Sarah and our daughter, Emily. Fever took them both in '71. His voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened around the coffee cup. "I couldn't stay in that house after. Too many ghosts." Nora understood all too well. "Thomas and I came out here from Pennsylvania in '71. His brother had written about the opportunities in the West land for the taking if you were willing to work it." She gazed out at the fields they'd struggled to tame. "It was harder than we imagined, but we were building something." "You still are," Vaughn said. "This is good land, Nora, worth fighting for." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it startled her. More surprising was how natural it felt to hear it from his lips. "Sometimes I think about selling," she admitted. "Going back east to my sister in Boston." "Is that what you want?" Nora considered the question. Was it? She'd been so focused on survival, on getting through each day without breaking apart, that she hadn't allowed herself to contemplate a future. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Thomas loved this place. He poured his heart into every acre. Leaving feels like betraying him somehow." Vaughn was quiet for a moment. "The dead don't care about land," he finally said. "They care about the living they left behind. Your husband would want you to be happy, whether that's here or in Boston." His words struck her deeply. "And what about you, Vaughn? Have you found happiness in your wandering?" A sad smile crossed his face. "Peace, maybe. Happiness is asking a lot." The conversation might have continued, but the sound of approaching riders put them both on alert. Vaughn was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he ordered, stepping off the porch. But Nora had already recognized the riders, the Taylors from the neighboring homestead, with their son Daniel leading the way. "Evening, Mrs. Flynn," Daniel called, slowing his horse as they approached. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Vaughn. "Didn't know you had company." "Mr. Aldridge is helping with the harvest," Nora explained, coming to stand beside Vaughn. "What brings you all by so late?" Mrs. Taylor, a stout woman with kind eyes, dismounted. "We've been meaning to come check on you, dear. Terrible business with Thomas." She glanced at Vaughn suspiciously. "Who did you say this was?" "Vaughn Aldridge." He introduced himself, extending a hand that Mr. Taylor reluctantly shook. "I'm staying on to help Mrs. Flynn while the sheriff tracks down her husband's killers." "Is that so?" Daniel said, his tone suggesting he didn't quite believe it. At 28, he'd been one of the first young men in the area to establish his own homestead and had occasionally helped Thomas with difficult tasks. "We could have helped with the harvest, Mrs. Flynn. No need to bring in strangers." There was something in his tone that made Nora bristle. "Mr. Aldridge offered his assistance when I needed it most, Daniel. I'm grateful for his help." Mrs. Taylor exchanged a look with her husband. "Well, we've brought some food, a stew and some fresh bread. Thought you might not be up to cooking much these days." "That's very kind," Nora said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Would you like to come in for some coffee?" The Taylors accepted, though Daniel continued to eye Vaughn with suspicion as they entered the small cabin. Inside, the conversation was strained, with Mrs. Taylor making well-meaning but painful inquiries about Nora's plans now that she was all alone. "I'm not selling the homestead, if that's what you're asking," Nora said firmly when the conversation inevitably turned that direction. "No one's suggesting that," Mr. Taylor assured her, though his expression suggested otherwise. But a woman on her own out here, it's not safe, Nora. Thomas would want you protected. I am protected, she replied, glancing at Vaughn, who had remained standing by the door, observing the interaction with quiet intensity. Daniel scoffed. By him? A drifter you've known for what, a week? How do you know he's not after your land himself? Daniel, his mother admonished, but the damage was done. Vaughn straightened, his expression hardening. Mrs. Flynn's arrangements are her own business, and I'll be moving on once the sheriff returns. The statement shouldn't have bothered Nora after all. It was the truth, but she felt an unexpected pang at the reminder that Vaughn's presence was temporary. Well, Mrs. Taylor said, clearly sensing the tension, we should be getting back before dark. Nora, dear, you know you're welcome at our place anytime, for meals or company. The implication was clear and Nora forced a smile. Thank you, I appreciate your kindness. After they'd gone, Nora leaned against the closed door with a sigh. I'm sorry about that. Daniel's always been protective of the local families. He's sweet on you, Vaughn observed, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. That's ridiculous. I'm a married, she stopped, the word catching in her throat. I was a married woman. Thomas and Daniel were friends. Doesn't mean he wasn't waiting, Vaughn said, his tone neutral. Man like that, established, watching a beautiful woman like you with another man, it's natural he'd be jealous. Beautiful. The word hung in the air between them. It had been so long since anyone but Thomas had called her beautiful that Nora hardly knew how to respond. It doesn't matter, she finally said. I'm not looking for another husband. Vaughn nodded, though something flickered in his eyes. Of course not. It's too soon. Too soon. The words implied a later, a future when it wouldn't be too soon. Nora turned away, confused by the direction of her thoughts. I should check on the animals before dark, she said, needing space to clear her head. I'll come with you, Vaughn offered, reaching for his hat. No, Nora said more sharply than she'd intended. No, I need a moment alone if you don't mind. Understanding crossed his face. Of course, I'll be here if you need me. In the barn, Nora leaned against her mare's stall, breathing in the familiar sense of hay and horse. What was happening to her? Thomas had been gone barely 2 weeks, and here she was, flustered by another man's presence, by a simple word, beautiful. Guilt washed over her. She had loved Thomas deeply. Their marriage had been one of true partnership and affection. How could she dishonor his memory by feeling? Whatever this was for a man she barely knew. Yet as she fed the animals and checked their water, Nora couldn't help remembering Vaughn's words at the grave. You're not alone. In the days since, he'd proven it wasn't just talk. He'd worked alongside her, respected her decisions, and offered strength without demanding her dependence. By the time she returned to the cabin, darkness had fallen completely. She found Vaughn sitting at the table, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. Feel better? He asked without looking up. Yes, she said, though it wasn't entirely true. She felt more confused than ever. Vaughn, I've been thinking. The wheat's almost all harvested now. You've done more than enough. His hands stilled. Are you asking me to leave? The question hung heavy in the air. Was she? Part of her wanted him gone, the part that felt guilty for the way her heart seemed to lighten when he was near. But another part, a stronger part, feared the loneliness that would follow his departure. No, she admitted softly, but I don't want you to feel obligated to stay. Vaughn set the revolver down and finally looked at her. I don't do anything out of obligation, Nora. I stay because I choose to. The simplicity of his answer disarmed her. Then I'm glad, she said, surprised by her own honesty. I'm glad you're here. A week later, Sheriff Mills returned with news that changed everything. Nora was hanging laundry while Vaughn repaired the chicken coop when the sheriff's horse appeared on the horizon. He's alone, Vaughn observed, setting down his tools. Not a good sign. They waited in tense silence as the sheriff approached. The grim expression on his weathered face told them all they needed to know even before he dismounted. They got away, Nora said flatly. It wasn't a question. Sheriff Mills removed his hat. I'm sorry, Mrs. Flynn. We tracked them as far as the territorial border, but they've got friends in New Mexico. Deputy Williams took a bullet in the shoulder, had to turn back. Vaughn stepped forward. And you're giving up. I've sent telegrams to the sheriffs down there, Mills defended. But my jurisdiction ends at the border, and I've got a town to protect. So Thomas's killers just walk free, Nora said, anger replacing her initial shock. Is that what passes for justice out here? The sheriff had the decency to look ashamed. I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Flynn. If they come back into Colorado territory, we'll get them. You have my word. But his word meant little to Nora now. After the sheriff left, she stormed into the cabin, slamming the door behind her. Vaughn followed, finding her pacing the small room like a caged animal. He didn't even try, she fumed. One man gets wounded and they all turn tail and run. The sheriff did what he could, Vaughn said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Territory's big, and Keller's gang knows how to disappear. Nora stopped pacing, a dangerous resolve forming in her mind. You know how to track, don't you? That's why the sheriff wanted you along. Vaughn's expression grew wary. Nora, you could find them, she pressed. We could find them, and then what? He challenged. What exactly would you do if you stood face to face with your husband's killers? The question gave her pause, but only briefly. Make them pay. Vaughn stepped closer, his voice lowering. Killing a man changes you, Nora, even when they deserve it. Trust me on this. Something in his tone told her he spoke from experience. So we do nothing. Let them continue hurting people, taking lives. No, he said firmly, but we do it smart, legal. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking, I know people in New Mexico territory, lawmen who owe me favors. Let me send some telegrams, see what I can find out about where Keller might be hiding. And then we talk to Judge Parker when he comes through on circuit next month, get him to issue warrants that will be valid across territorial lines. It wasn't the immediate action Nora craved, but she recognized the wisdom in his approach. Fine, she agreed reluctantly, but I want to be involved every step of the way. These are the men who killed my husband. I won't be kept in the dark. Vaughn nodded. Partners, then. The word warmed her unexpectedly. Partners. It implied equality, respect, things Thomas had given her, but that few other men seemed to think a woman deserved. Partners, she echoed, extending her hand. Vaughn took it, his calloused palm rough against hers. The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, and Nora found herself studying his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship, the set of his jaw that suggested determination and strength. I should ride into town, he said, breaking the moment. Send those telegrams while the office is still open. I'll come with you, Nora decided. I need supplies anyway. The ride to Silverdale took just under an hour. Nora hadn't been to town since Thomas's funeral, and she felt the weight of curious stares as they rode down the main street together. Ignore them, Vaughn advised quietly. Small towns run on gossip, and gossip they would, Nora knew. A widow riding into town with a handsome stranger would set tongues wagging for days, but she found, somewhat to her surprise, that she didn't particularly care. They separated at the general store, with Vaughn heading to the telegraph office while Nora gathered the supplies they needed. As she was selecting coffee beans, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Flynn, how lovely to see you in town. Nora turned to find Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of Silverdale, regarding her with barely concealed curiosity. Mrs. Peterson, Nora acknowledged with a nod, just picking up a few essentials. So I see. The older woman's gaze drifted to the window, where Vaughn could be seen crossing the street. And I see you found help at your homestead. How fortunate. The implication in her tone was unmistakable. Nora straightened, meeting the woman's judgmental stare directly. Mr. Aldridge has been invaluable in completing the harvest that my husband began. I'm very grateful for his assistance. I'm sure you are, dear, Mrs. Peterson said with a thin smile. But you know how people talk. A young widow alone with a man of uncertain background. It raises questions. Anger flared in Nora's chest. The only thing that should raise questions, Mrs. Peterson, is why this town hasn't done more to catch the men who murdered my husband. Mr. Aldridge has shown more concern for justice than anyone else in Silverdale. Mrs. Peterson's face reddened. Well, I never know, you never have, Nora interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Never lost a husband to violence, never had to figure out how to survive on your own, so perhaps you should reserve judgment on matters you don't understand. Leaving the stunned woman behind, Nora quickly paid for her purchases and exited the store just as Vaughn was approaching. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting her flushed face. "You look like you're ready to fight someone." "Just the narrow-mindedness of small-town gossips," Nora replied, loading her parcels into her saddlebags. "Did you send your telegrams?" "I did. Should hear back in a few days." He glanced back at the store, where Mrs. Peterson could be seen peering through the window at them. "Want to give them something real to talk about. There's a new dining room at the hotel. Been told the food's decent." The invitation caught Nora off guard. Dining in public together would certainly fuel the gossip Mrs. Peterson was so eager to spread. But the thought of sitting across from Vaughn, sharing a meal that she hadn't had to cook herself, was surprisingly appealing. "You know what? Yes," she decided. "I haven't had a meal I didn't prepare myself since Thomas died. It would be nice to be served for a change." The surprise on Vaughn's face gave way to a warm smile. "Then let's go scandalize Silverdale." The hotel dining room was modest but clean, with white tablecloths and actual glass windows, a luxury in a frontier town. As Vaughn had predicted, their entrance caused a stir among the few other diners, but he guided Nora to a table with a confidence that made the whispers seem inconsequential. "You're enjoying this," Nora accused as he held her chair. "Maybe a little," he admitted, taking the seat across from her. "Small towns need something to talk about. Might as well be us." Such a simple word, yet it carried a weight that Nora wasn't quite ready to examine. Instead, she focused on the menu, eventually ordering the chicken while Vaughn chose the beef stew. As they waited for their food, Nora found herself studying the other diners, mostly traveling businessmen, and a few local merchants with their wives. She felt oddly disconnected from them, as if Thomas's death had placed her outside the normal flow of society. "They're staring because you're beautiful," Vaughn said quietly, misinterpreting her thoughts. "Not because they're judging you." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You keep saying that." "Saying what?" "That I'm beautiful." She smoothed her napkin needlessly. "It's disconcerting." Vaughn leaned back, regarding her curiously. "Has no one ever told you that before?" "Thomas did," she said softly. "But that was different. He was my husband, and that means his words were true while mine are." "Inappropriate," Nora supplied, though the word felt wrong even as she said it. Vaughn considered this. "Perhaps by some standards, but I've never been one for propriety, Nora. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say." His gray eyes held her steadily. "You are beautiful. That's not flattery or impropriety, it's simply a fact." Nora was saved from having to respond by the arrival of their food. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the simple pleasure of a well-cooked meal providing a welcome distraction from the intensity of their conversation. "Tell me about your life before Colorado," Vaughn said eventually. "You mentioned Pennsylvania," grateful for the change of subject, Nora nodded. "I grew up outside Philadelphia. My father was a carpenter. Thomas apprenticed with him, that's how we met." "Love at first sight." There was genuine curiosity in his question. Nora smiled at the memory. "Hardly. I thought he was terribly serious. He would come to dinner at our house and barely speak 2 words. It took me months to realize he was just shy around me." Her smile faded slightly. "But once we got to know each other, it was easy. Being with Thomas was always easy." "That's rare," Vaughn observed. "Most worthwhile things in life don't come easy." "What about you and your wife? Was that easy?" A shadow crossed his face. "Sarah was the daughter of my father's business partner. We grew up together, always expected to marry. But no, it wasn't easy. Sarah was complicated, beautiful, passionate, but troubled in ways I didn't understand until it was too late." There was pain in his voice that suggested depths to the story he wasn't sharing. Nora didn't press. Instead, she asked about his travels, and Vaughn obliged with tales of the territories he'd crossed, the people he'd met, the wonders he'd seen. By the time they finished their meal, the dining room had emptied and the sun was beginning to set. They rode back to the homestead in the gathering twilight, a comfortable silence between them. That night, Nora lay awake in bed, replaying the day's events. Dining with Vaughn had felt dangerously close to courting, though neither of them had acknowledged it as such. Was she ready for that? Could she ever be ready to open her heart again? Knowing the pain that came with loss, more troubling was the realization that, For the first time since Thomas's death, she had gone hours without thinking of him. The guilt of that sat heavy on her chest as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, Nora woke to the sound of a wagon approaching. Peering out the window, she was surprised to see Daniel Taylor pulling up to the cabin, alone. Vaughn was already outside, having begun his morning chores. Nora quickly dressed and joined them, noting the tension in both men's postures. "Morning, Daniel," she called, forcing brightness into her voice. "What brings you by so early?" Daniel's usually friendly face was set in stern lines. "My folks sent me to check on you, Mrs. Flynn. Sheriff told us he came by yesterday with news about Thomas's killers." "That's right," Nora confirmed. "Unfortunately, they crossed into New Mexico territory. The sheriff had to turn back." Daniel nodded, casting a suspicious glance at Vaughn. "And Mr. Aldridge is still helping out." "I am," Vaughn confirmed, his tone neutral but his stance subtly protective as he moved closer to Nora. "The harvest is almost complete," Nora added, sensing the unspoken accusation. "Thanks to Mr. Aldridge's hard work. And then he'll be moving on, I expect," Daniel asked pointedly. Before Nora could respond, Vaughn spoke. "My plans depend on tracking down the Keller gang. I've sent telegrams to contacts in New Mexico. Once I have information, I intend to see justice done for Thomas Flynn." Daniel's expression darkened. "That's the sheriff's job, not some drifters." "The sheriff gave up," Nora interjected, anger coloring her voice. "Vaughn is the only one who seems to care about bringing Thomas's killers to justice." "Vaughn, is it?" Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Seems you two have gotten quite familiar in a short time." Nora felt her cheeks burn with indignation. "How dare you imply—" "I'm not implying anything, Mrs. Flynn," Daniel interrupted, his tone softening slightly. "I'm concerned for you, we all are. Your husband was my friend, and I promised him I'd look out for you if anything ever happened to him." The revelation stunned Nora. "Thomas asked you to watch over me," Daniel nodded solemnly. "Last summer, when the influenza was going around, he was worried he might not pull through, made me swear I'd make sure you were taken care of." Nora glanced at Vaughn, whose expression had grown unreadable. "I appreciate Thomas's concern and yours," she said carefully, "but I'm capable of making my own decisions about my future and who I allow to help me." "Of course you are," Daniel agreed quickly. "I just want to make sure you're not being taken advantage of in your grief." Vaughn stepped forward then, his patience clearly at an end. "I think Mrs. Flynn has made it clear that my presence here is her choice. Unless you have actual help to offer, Taylor, I suggest you respect her wishes." The two men faced each other, tension crackling between them. For a moment, Nora feared they might come to blows. "Daniel," she said, stepping between them, "please thank your parents for their concern, and thank you for keeping your promise to Thomas, but I'm all right, truly." After a long, tense moment, Daniel nodded stiffly. "If you say so, Mrs. Flynn." He climbed back onto his wagon. "But if you need anything at all, you know where to find us." As they watched him drive away, Vaughn let out a breath. "He's in love with you, you know." "Don't be ridiculous," Nora said automatically, though Daniel's behavior suggested otherwise. "It's not ridiculous, it's obvious." Vaughn's voice had an edge to it that Nora hadn't heard before, and he has a point. "I am a drifter. You don't know anything about me, not really." "I know enough," Nora countered, surprised by her own certainty. "I know you've helped me when you had no reason to. I know you're a man of your word. And I know that, when you look at me, you see me not just a widow to be pitied or a woman to be protected, but a person with her own mind." Vaughn's expression softened. "Is that enough?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to address. "It's enough for now," Nora finally said. 3 days later, responses to Vaughn's telegrams began to arrive. The first came from a marshal in Santa Fe, confirming that members of the Keller gang had been seen in a small settlement called Cimarron, about a week's ride south. "This is it," Nora said, reading the telegram with excitement. "We know where they are now." Vaughn's expression remained grave. "Knowing where they were a week ago isn't the same as knowing where they are now, and Cimarron's a rough place, lawless, even by frontier standards." "So we go to Cimarron," Nora said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We find them and we bring them to justice." "We." Vaughn raised an eyebrow. Nora, you can't possibly think I'd take you into that kind of danger. I'm not asking permission, she replied firmly. These are the men who killed my husband. I have every right to see justice done. And what exactly do you think justice looks like? Vaughn challenged. Shooting it out with armed killers, watching them hang, will either of those things bring Thomas back? His words struck a nerve. No, Nora admitted softly. Nothing will bring him back, but they need to answer for what they've done. Vaughn sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, let me send one more telegram to Judge Parker. If he'll issue warrants, we can approach this legally, get the territorial marshals involved. And if he won't, then I'll go to Cimarron myself. His expression brooked no argument. Alone. Nora wanted to protest, but the determination in his eyes told her it would be futile. Fine, she conceded. Send your telegram, but if Judge Parker doesn't help, we go together or I follow you on my own. Your choice. A ghost of a smile touched Vaughn's lips. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Nora Flynn. I'll take that as a compliment, she replied, unable to suppress her own smile. The next day brought another telegram, this one from a deputy marshal in Las Vegas, New Mexico territory. It confirmed that Jack Keller and 3 men matching the descriptions of his gang had robbed a bank in Las Vegas just 2 days prior. They'd headed northwest, possibly back toward Colorado. They're coming back this way, Nora said, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Why would they risk that? Vaughn's expression was grim. Because they're arrogant. They think they got away with killing Thomas and now they're feeling bold. He folded the telegram carefully. But it means we might not have to go to New Mexico after all, if they're heading back this way. We could intercept them, Nora finished, her mind racing. Set a trap. Whoa, Vaughn cautioned. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I need to talk to Sheriff Mills, show him these telegrams. If Keller's gang is returning to his jurisdiction, he'll have to act. But when they rode into town the next morning, they found the sheriff's office empty except for young Deputy Williams, his arm still in a sling from the bullet wound he'd taken during the pursuit. Sheriff's out investigating cattle theft at the Morrison Ranch, the deputy explained. Won't be back till tomorrow at the earliest. Vaughn showed him the telegrams. This can't wait, Williams. Keller's gang is headed back this way. The sheriff needs to organize a posse. The deputy's eyes widened as he read. This is serious, all right. But I can't authorize a posse with the sheriff gone. He hesitated. Look, I can send a rider out to Morrison's, get word to the sheriff, but it'll take time. Time we don't have, Nora said urgently. If Keller's gang crosses back into Colorado, they could hit any homestead along the way. More people could die. Williams looked torn. I understand your concern, Mrs. Flynn, but I have my orders. The best I can do is send that rider and maybe telegraph the sheriff in Glenwood, see if he can spare some men. As they left the sheriff's office, Nora could feel frustration building inside her. This is useless, she fumed. By the time all these lawmen coordinate, Keller will have come and gone, possibly killing more innocent people along the way. Vaughn was quiet as they walked back to their horses, his expression thoughtful. There's another option, he said finally, but you won't like it. What is it? We set the trap ourselves. His eyes met her steadily. Use your homestead as bait. Nora stopped short. My homestead. You want to lure killers to my home. It makes sense, Vaughn explained. They've been there before they know the layout. They stole 3 horses, but you still have 2 more. Could be enough to tempt them. And what happens when they show up? It would just be the 2 of us against 4 armed men. Vaughn shook his head. Not just us. I know at least 3 men in town who'd be willing to help former Army scouts who don't need a sheriff's permission to do what's right. With their help, we could set up a proper ambush. The plan was dangerous, possibly even foolhardy, but as Nora considered the alternatives, she realized it might be their best chance to catch Thomas's killers. All right, she agreed after a long moment. But we do this smart. No unnecessary risks. Vaughn's relief was visible. I'll talk to my contacts this afternoon. We'll need supplies, ammunition. And I need to secure the cabin, Nora added, her mind already working through the practical details. Move anything valuable to the root cellar, just in case. As they rode back to the homestead, a strange calm settled over Nora. For weeks, she had been reacting to Thomas's death, grieving, surviving, accepting help. Now, finally, she was taking action. It felt right somehow, even with all the risks involved. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Vaughn broke their companionable silence. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Nora turned to him, curious. "Of course. When this is over, when we've caught Keller and his gang, what then?" His eyes were serious as they met hers. "What happens to us?" The question took her breath away. Us, there it was again, that simple word with its complex implications. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "A month ago, I couldn't imagine a future without Thomas. Now I can't quite picture what my future looks like at all." She hesitated, then added, "But I know I've come to value your presence in my life." Vaughn's expression remained unreadable. "Value," he repeated. "That's a careful word. What would you have me say?" Nora asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. "That I have feelings for you. That would be complicated. Because of Thomas, because of everything," she said. "Because it's too soon. Because I'm still grieving. Because I don't know if what I feel is real or just gratitude or loneliness." Vaughn nodded slowly. "I understand that, better than most." He looked out at the darkening sky. "When Sarah died, I was lost, made some choices I'm not proud of, looking for anything to fill the void she left." His voice grew softer. "I wouldn't want that for you, Nora. Wouldn't want to be something you cling to just to avoid the pain." His honesty touched her deeply. "And what about you? What do you want?" For the first time since she'd met him, Vaughn looked uncertain. "I've spent 7 years running from one place to the next, never staying long enough to form attachments. It was easier that way." He met her gaze again. "But being here with you, it's made me wonder if there might be another way to live." Before Nora could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Vaughn was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his gun. "Stay here," he ordered, stepping off the porch, but it wasn't the Keller gang. As the riders came into view in the fading light, Nora recognized the 3 men Vaughn had mentioned: Simmons, Cooper, and Reeves, all former soldiers turned ranchers who occasionally worked as scouts for the army. "Evening, Mrs. Flynn," Simmons called as they dismounted. "Aldridge here tells us you've got some trouble that needs handling." As Vaughn explained the situation and his plan, Nora watched the men's faces. They listened intently, asking practical questions about sightlines and cover, the kind of questions that told her they took the threat and their role in neutralizing it seriously. "So we're agreed," Vaughn concluded. "2 men in the barn, 1 in the root cellar with Mrs. Flynn, and I'll be in the cabin. If Keller follows his previous pattern, they'll come just before dawn, thinking to catch everyone sleeping." "And if they don't show?" Cooper asked. "Then we try again the next night," Vaughn said firmly. "These men killed Thomas Flynn and God knows how many others. They need to be stopped." The men nodded in agreement, and Nora felt a surge of gratitude for their willingness to help. As they discussed the finer points of the plan, she slipped inside to prepare coffee, her mind whirling with the evening's revelations both about the trap they were setting and the feelings Vaughn had all but confessed. The next 2 days were a flurry of preparations. The men established hiding places and sight lines, rehearsed signals, and checked their weapons. Nora insisted on being an active participant, refusing to be relegated to the role of helpless female. "I know how to shoot," she reminded Vaughn when he suggested she remain hidden in the root cellar throughout. "Thomas made sure of that." "It's not about your abilities," Vaughn argued. "It's about keeping you safe." "This is my home," Nora countered. "My husband they killed. I won't cower in a cellar while other people risk their lives for my justice." In the end, they compromised. Nora would stay in the root cellar until the shooting started, but she would be armed and ready to defend herself if necessary. The first night, they waited in vain. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness, every distant sound making them tense in anticipation. But dawn came with no sign of the Keller gang. The second night was the same, though a thunderstorm added to the tension, each crack of lightning making them jump. By the third night, fatigue was setting in. The men took turns napping during the day, but the constant vigilance was wearing on all of them. "Maybe they're not coming back this way after all," Cooper suggested as they took their positions for the third night. "Or maybe they heard about our trap," Reeves added. "Word gets around. but Vaughn remained determined. "One more night," he insisted. "If they don't show by morning, we'll reconsider." As Nora settled into the root cellar with Simmons, shotgun across her lap, she found herself praying not just for justice, but for an end to the waiting, one way or another. It was the darkest hour before dawn when she heard the soft whinny of horses being led carefully toward the barn. Beside her, Simmons tensed, raising a finger to his lips though Nora had made no sound. Through the small window of the root cellar, she could make out shadows moving in the yard, 4 men, just as Vaughn had predicted. They moved with the confidence of those who believed their prey was unaware, heading straight for the barn where the horses were kept. Simmons raised his lantern, covering it partially with his coat, and flashed it twice the signal they'd agreed upon. From the barn, a matching flash confirmed that Cooper and Reeves had seen the approaching men. Nora's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the raiders would hear it. Her palms were slick with sweat as she gripped the shotgun, watching the shadows converge on the barn. And then everything happened at once. "Hold it right there, Keller," Vaughn's voice rang out from the cabin porch where he'd positioned himself in the shadows. "You're surrounded." For a split second the raiders froze, then chaos erupted. The men scattered, drawing weapons as they dove for cover. Gunfire exploded from the barn as Cooper and Reeves opened fire, and Vaughn's revolver barked from the porch. "Stay down," Simmons ordered Nora, raising his rifle and firing through the root cellar window. But Nora couldn't just hide while the men who had killed Thomas were right outside. Ignoring Simmons's protest, she moved to the cellar door, peering out into the chaotic scene. One of the raiders was already down, clutching his leg and cursing. Another was pinned behind the water trough, exchanging fire with Cooper in the barn. And there, moving toward the cabin with a reckless determination, was a man with a distinctive scar running down his cheek. Jack Keller himself. He was heading straight for Vaughn, who was reloading his revolver and hadn't seen the outlaws approach. Without thinking, Nora threw open the cellar door and raised her shotgun. "Vaughn, behind you," she screamed, firing a warning shot that sent dirt spraying at Keller's feet. The outlaw spun toward her, his face contorted with rage as he recognized her. "You," he snarled, raising his pistol. Time seemed to slow. Nora saw the barrel of his gun align with her chest, saw his finger tighten on the trigger. Knew with terrible certainty that she was about to die just as Thomas had. Then Vaughn was there, throwing himself into Keller with the force of a charging bull. The 2 men crashed to the ground, Keller's shot going wild as they grappled in the dirt. The fight was brutal and swift. Though Keller was younger, Vaughn fought with the desperate strength of a man protecting something precious. Within moments, he had the outlaw pinned, his revolver pressed to Keller's temple. "Give me a reason," Vaughn growled. "Just one." For a terrifying moment, Nora thought he would pull the trigger. The rage in his eyes was something she had never seen before, a glimpse of the darkness he had hinted at in his past. "Vaughn," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need him alive, for justice." The words seemed to penetrate his fury. Slowly, the wild look faded from his eyes, replaced by a cold determination. With a swift movement, he brought the butt of his revolver down on Keller's head, knocking him unconscious. By then, the shooting had stopped. Cooper and Reeves emerged from the barn, herding the remaining 2 outlaws at gunpoint. The 4th lay unmoving near the chicken coop. "He's dead," Reeves confirmed, gesturing to the still form. "Tried to make a run for it." Simmons quickly bound the unconscious Keller, while Cooper and Reeves secured the other prisoners. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Nora found herself staring at the man who had killed her husband, now just an unconscious outlaw, stripped of his power to terrify. "Are you all right?" Vaughn asked, coming to stand beside her. There was blood on his shirt, though whether it was his or Keller's, she couldn't tell. "Yes," she said, though her hands were shaking as she lowered the shotgun. "You," he nodded, his eyes searching hers. "You saved my life." "Keller would have shot me in the back if you hadn't warned me. You'd have done the same for me," Nora said simply. Then, because she needed to touch him, to confirm that he was truly unharmed, she reached out and took his hand. "It's over." Vaughn's fingers tightened around hers. "Yes," he agreed. "It's over." But it wasn't, not really. The next weeks were filled with legal proceedings as Sheriff Mills, chagrined at having missed the capture of the notorious Keller gang, processed the prisoners and arranged for their transfer to Denver for trial. Nora had to give statements, identify the men, relive the night of Thomas's murder again and again for officials. Through it all, Vaughn remained by her side, a steady presence that she came to rely on more than she cared to admit. But as the legal proceedings wound down and Keller was sentenced to hang for his crimes, a new tension emerged between them. "Judge Parker asked me to consider becoming a deputy marshal," Vaughn told her one evening as they sat on the porch. Fall was coming, the nights growing cooler. Said he was impressed with how we handled the Keller situation. Nora's heart sank. A marshal's job would mean traveling, tracking outlaws across territories. It would mean Vaughn leaving. "That's a great honor," she managed to say. "Will you accept?" Vaughn was quiet for a long moment. "I told him I needed time to consider, that I had commitments here that I couldn't just abandon." Hope fluttered in Nora's chest. "Commitments?" His eyes met hers, serious and intent. "Nora, these past months with you, they've changed me, made me want things I thought I'd never want again." "What things?" she asked softly, though she knew the answer. "A home," he said simply. "Someone to come home to." He took her hand, his touch gentle. "I know it hasn't been that long since Thomas. I know you're still grieving. But I need to know if there's any chance, any at all, that you might someday feel for me what I've come to feel for you." The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Nora looked at their joined hands, thinking of all they had been through together, the grief she had shared with him, the danger they had faced, the quiet moments of understanding that had slowly built into something deeper. "I will always love Thomas," she said finally. "He was my first love, the man I thought I'd grow old with. Nothing can change that." Vaughn nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I understand." "But," Nora continued, squeezing his hand, "I've learned that the heart has an endless capacity for love. That new love doesn't diminish what came before." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not ready to marry again, Vaughn, not yet. But if you're willing to be patient, to give me time, then yes, there's more than a chance." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I've waited 7 years to feel this way again," he said. "I can wait as long as you need." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Nora didn't pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning. When they parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "So what now?" he asked. "If I take the marshal's job, I'd have to travel, but I could make this my home base. Or, Nora prompted when he hesitated, "or we could sell this place," he suggested cautiously. "Start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere without so many memories." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Leave the homestead that she and Thomas had built together. But as Nora looked around at the land, she realized something important. The memories of Thomas weren't tied to this place. They lived in her heart, and she would carry them wherever she went. "Where would we go?" she asked, the question itself an answer. Vaughn's smile was like nothing she had seen before, open, hopeful, full of promise. "I've always been partial to Northern California. Good land there, I hear. Not as harsh as Colorado winters." "California," Nora repeated, testing the word. It sounded like adventure, like possibility, like future. "I'd like to see it someday." "Then you will," Vaughn promised, sealing the words with another kiss. Spring came to Colorado with its usual unpredictability, warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, the land slowly awakening from winter's grip. By then, the Keller gang was just a memory in Silverdale, their reign of terror ended by the hangman's noose in Denver. Nora stood on the porch of her cabin, for just a few more days, watching as Vaughn loaded the last of their belongings onto the wagon. The homestead had sold quickly once word got out that the widow Flynn was moving on, the land purchased by a young family eager for a fresh start. "Just as she was. That's the last of it," Vaughn announced, securing the tarp over their possessions. "Unless there's anything else you want to bring." Nora shook her head. "No, I have everything that matters." She glanced at the simple gold band she still wore on her left hand. After much thought, she had decided to keep wearing it for the journey west. She wasn't ready to remove it yet, and Vaughn understood. The past year had been one of profound transformation. Grief had carved new channels within her heart, but those channels had gradually filled with different waters: friendship, trust, and eventually, love. A different kind of love than what she had shared with Thomas, but no less real. Vaughn had kept his promise to be patient. They had taken things slowly, getting to know each other in all the ways that mattered. He had accepted the marshal's position, but arranged to work primarily in the Western Territories, which would put them closer to their destination in California. Ready? He asked now, holding out his hand to her. Nora took one last look at the cabin, at the distant spot where Thomas lay buried beneath a proper headstone that she had commissioned with the money from the sale of the homestead. She had said her goodbyes yesterday, leaving wildflowers on his grave and telling him of her plans. Somehow, she knew he would have approved. Thomas had always wanted her happiness above all else. Ready, she confirmed, placing her hand in Vaughn's. As they set off down the long road that would eventually take them to California, Nora felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't leaving Thomas behind. He would always be part of her. But she was moving forward, toward a future bright with promise, a future where she wasn't alone. 5 years later, Nora Aldridge stood on the porch of their California ranch house, watching as Vaughn taught their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. The boy's delighted laughter carried across the meadow, mingling with the sounds of spring birdsong, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the tall grass. Their daughter, Sarah, just a year old, slept peacefully in her cradle nearby, her tiny features a perfect blend of her parents'. The ranch was thriving, with good water and fertile soil that yielded abundant crops. Vaughn's work as a marshal kept him away occasionally, but never for long, and the respect he had earned meant he could often choose assignments close to home. As she watched her family, Nora's hand drifted to the locket she wore around her neck inside, a small portrait of her first husband, preserved not in grief, but in honor of a love that had helped shape her into the woman she was today. Life had taught her that love wasn't a finite resource, to be hoarded or spent only once. It expanded to fill whatever space was created for it, growing stronger and deeper with each passing season. And as Vaughn looked up, catching her eye across the distance and offering a smile that still made her heart race, Nora knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was home. She was loved, and she was never alone.